So you are a single member LLC. Do you actually need an operating agreement? In other words, like, why have a contract when you're the only party to the contract? Well, the answer might surprise you. Stick around. Hey out there, welcome back. My name is Rob. I am a wedding industry lawyer, and in this week's video, we're talking about whether or not your single member LLC needs an operating agreement. So an operating agreement is a document that is typically associated with LLCs, limited liability companies, that governs the way that the LLC will operate. The operating agreement in an LLC sets out how the business will actually run. So an operating agreement is going to cover things like who are the managers, when do the actual owners meet, what are the ways in which the profit will be distributed and how much, what are the percentages, how often, what happens in terms of succession planning, what if one member bows out or is killed. So the operating agreement is kind of like the bylaws of, or articles of incorporation, or the bylaws of a corporation. It's just the blueprint for generally how the LLC will be run. The operating agreement does not get filed with the state, which is unlike the articles of organization, which is kind of like letting the state know that this LLC exists. Here are the parameters of how it's run, who's in it, where the address, these type of things. It's kind of, the articles of organization is an official document that's filed with the state. The operating agreement, as I mentioned, being the document that lays out how the LLC will be run. Now, definitely, if your LLC has more than one owner, more than one member, you got to, I mean, I'm not saying you have to, but an operating agreement is going to be extremely necessary for the reasons that we mentioned. It lays out the obligations that the owners or the members have to one another on how the business is run. But the question of the day, the $64,000 question is, why would one person need that? Like, isn't it what's going on in your brain, how the business is going to be run? Why would that need to be put down on paper if you're the only person that gives a crap about it? So there is an answer to this. Now, there are going to be some jurisdictions that, even though you're a single member LLC, you're still required to have an operating agreement. So there are some jurisdictions that are going to tell you that you could have 1,000 member owners, or you can have one owner, one member. You got to have an operating agreement. So setting that aside, where you statutorily have to have one, it is still going to be a good idea for you to just go ahead and plunk down the money and pay an attorney to draft you an operating agreement. And here's why. The first reason is that, as I've mentioned in other videos, the idea of the LLC is to shield your personal stuff, your Toyota Hyundai, your Nissan Sentra, your Beanie Baby collection, your purple orchid that sits in your office strictly so that you don't look like a crazy person in your videos. All of your personal assets need to be protected from the losses and the liabilities of the company. And that's the point of the LLC. So the stronger we can make that corporate veil, the better. So the operating agreement, just even though you're a single member, even though you wrote it or you had somebody write it, it only is obligatory to you. That shows to the world that your LLC is real, that it is legitimate. It is one of the bricks that you can use to build when someone wants to tear down your house, get to your personal assets. It makes the corporate veil stronger for you when you have an operating agreement. So that is, I would say, one of the major reasons why you want an operating agreement if you're a single member LLC. So the second reason why I would recommend, depending on your circumstances, talk to your doctor to make sure that it's right for you. But one of the reasons, the second reason why I would say that it's recommended for you is because every state typically has basically what, for lack of a better word, LLC default rules. So LLC should, have a physical address located within the state, or LLC should, have blah, 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 blah. Set rules. And the reason why, well, in part, the reason why that these statutes exist, these default rules, is in case LLCs have no operating agreement, they have ambiguous terms for their operating agreement, or otherwise need kind of like a tiebreaker, for lack of a better word. So there are default rules that will govern your LLC if you do not have an operating agreement. And so having an operating agreement takes that power away from the state statutes. It allows you to dictate how your LLC will be run rather than some statute that doesn't have you in mind. So by way of example, some LLC statutes deal with succession planning. So what happens if the member dies or becomes incapacitated? Who steps in to run the business, or how is the business wound down? So depending on your state, that could be different. It could be contrary to how you want. You might not want your grandkid to take over. You might not want your kid, your stepkid. They're watching the Kardashians on TV all day. You don't want them running your company. So having an operating agreement where it lays that out, it supplants or supersedes the state default rules. So that's a really good incentive for you to go ahead and get an operating agreement so that you can basically be the ruler of your own domain in case you go somewhere, or in case there's an issue in which there is a dispute. And does your operating agreement rule, or does the default rules of the state rule? So definitely for that reason alone. The third kind of major reason why you would want to have an operating agreement as a single member LLC is that sometimes if you're in a situation where you're shopping around for money, or maybe even you're wanting to open a bank account, it's good to show these people, the financial institutions, the investors, whoever it is, maybe potential members, that you have your SHIT together and that you already have an idea, a perspective of all the things that the operating agreement covers. Like they can see, oh, okay, this is what this is what you're thinking about succession planning or profit split or percentages, or whether or not the LLC is going to have a manager, these type of things. So having that operating agreement in hand when you need to get a bank account or you're shopping around to get money, it's helpful, and in some instances it's required. There are some banking institutions that are going to want to see that document as a formality anyway. So to kind of sum up, you're a single member LLC. Should you get an operating agreement? And the answer is going to be it depends, but it's recommended. And in some jurisdictions, it's actually required. But even if you're outside one of those jurisdictions, just having it to strengthen your corporate veil, having it so that you are dictating how your business is run versus the state default rules. And then finally, if you're in the situation like many of us are trying to get that money, it might be required, or at least look good when you're in that situation. So I hope that you found the content of this video helpful and informative. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. If you are listening to this as a podcast on Stitcher, on Spotify, Apple, whatever they got now, be sure to leave a comment. Can you leave a comment on podcasts? I don't know why I'm so confused about this still. But anyway, do whatever you do. If you listen to podcasts or don't, whatever you want, this week, it's on you. Anyway, new videos every Monday. Be sure to check us out, Wedding Industry Law on YouTube. And with that, folks, we'll see you next time.